Okay, we are back for RJ's Evolution Hour, Episode 5, Aftershow, wherein you fine folk can talk about whatever you like under the sun.
Yeah, I'll try to monitor the screen on there as to any little topics that came up. I'll start off with something utterly boring, maybe, or not, because I was reminded about the movie Oliver and Food, Glorious Food, Glorious Food. And it's one of my favorite cases of a big budget movie and the intriguing things of how it was made and all that kind of stuff. And it's also in the category of a musical that tells its story better than the non-musical version. There's only a couple examples. My Fair Lady is the classic example that tells Pygmalion way better than Bernard Shaw does.
Hold up.
It's hard to imagine having a non-musical version of My Fair Lady. Why would you want that? You know?
Hold up, Chief. Hold up. I'm getting a black screen on the video preview.
Oh God! I'm seeing my mug on my screen here on your screen, along with the RJ After Dark, and here we are at the after show, and all of that.
Indeed. Hold on. Let me just.
I'm seeing it from my end. If anybody on the comments section wants to weigh in to say, are you seeing my mug, and hearing my voice? Okay.
Let me go to the actual and take.
Yeah, I'm seeing your little mouse click moving around. Yeah, I see your little finger. It's right over Fino. Okay, so there. I'm getting you.
Yeah, we're good. Okay, it's just the live dashboard screen is acting stupid. Okay.
Ah, well, there we go. Yeah, and so
is everyone seeing and hearing us?
Paint Your Wagon. Oh, I'm ambivalent about Paint Your Wagon. Alas, it's got a few interesting score elements about it. Oh, RJ could talk about the evolution of hamburger, and thank you. Nobody knows quite where hamburgers come from, by the way. It's still kind of a mystery, and there's debate. It's probably early 20th century, but it's kind of hard to tell. But anyway, off on about Oliver, because of Food, Glorious Food. It tells the movie, if you're familiar with the David Lean version from the 1940s, that superb film. Alec Guinness played Fagin in it, and it got turned into a giant musical. That played in London in the 1960s and then got turned into a giant film. And it was big. It literally occupied the entire studio where it was produced. Every single soundstage, all of their open air things was all devoted to Oliver. It was a 100% operation. If you've ever seen the movie, very little of it is filmed outside of the soundstage. That gigantic set, the street that Oliver's uncle lives on, that's for the movie. That was built for the movie. That's not London. And in fact, if you look really closely at some of the scenes, you can actually spot off in the distance one of the other London sets that's in the thing. That's why they never turned the camera around, because if they had in that scene, it would have pointed back at the scaffolding and stuff of the other London set, the one that's got the railroad train and stuff going over it. So it was just gigantic. But the really interesting thing for me was the musical aspect, that John Green and he was known as Johnny Green back in his old music direction days, like Johnny Williams. They always gave them diminutive names because people who worked on musicals were looked down upon by the serious composers. And John Green had become head of the MGM music department, but that had no effect at all on the major musicals at MGM, because the Freed unit, the ones that made Singing in the Rain and all of that, Freed had complete, absolute control over everything that went on in his division. And so he paid no attention whatsoever to what was happening over in the actual music department that was run by John Green. And so after MGM kind of was on the road to collapse and a few other things, he was signed on to do the music direction on Oliver, that was being made at Columbia Pictures as a separate standalone production, and pull out all the stocks. Well, John Green, for really aggressive, dissonant orchestration. And the score for Oliver is the most spectacular, dissonant, quirky pieces of orchestration that I've ever heard in a musical. Very complicated. In fact, the only stuff that comes anywhere close to it is some of the bits from Moulin Rouge that was done, the end credit stuff later on. But even it is more pop music oriented. If you've ever seen the old Danny Kaye movie, The Inspector General, which was done at Warner Brothers, that had John Green as music director. He was ferreted over there as an assistant. And it's got really Warner Brothers-y tense orchestration, xylophones and all this other kind of stuff in it that's kind of baby Oliver. But he never was able to do any of that at MGM. And then he had Oliver to play with. And he did some just amazing stuff. If you have a chance to hear the old London cast recording of Oliver, you'll discover that the one particular big production number, the Consider Yourself number, that took like a week to film, has a merry-go-round motif in it. And in the original play version, you've got the merry-go-round comes in separately. The music stops and this merry-go-round motif comes in and does its shtick, and then they go back to the main theme afterwards. Green decided not to do that. And he has the merry-go-round come in while the main theme is running in a different key and a different rhythm. Using this camshaft out of sync quality that is producing a certain amount of disquiet in the audience subliminally. And very immediately after that, you're going off into the world of Fagin and the dark swelter behind the scenes with orchestration that's straight out of Richard Strauss Salome. It's very early 20th century avant-garde, late Romanticism. And so that is a film that just from a cinemusic point of view is just astonishing. And I also remember how the fact that every bloody despised Oliver, in part because of the role that Ona White played in it. She was the choreographer. She also did Music Man a few years earlier and a bunch of movies that's not as good. But she has a very mass angular kind of style that the Agnes DeMille set absolutely despised. Agnes DeMille worked on Oklahoma and all of that, and she comes from a balletic background, and she was the daughter of Cecil B. DeMille, the movie producer. And so all of the ones that were part of the Agnes DeMille artsy group set hated Ona White, and therefore hated Oliver because she was the one that did the production number on it. But there is one scene that illustrates that, at least in this film, as well as in The Music Man, boy, did she know what she was doing here. It works perfectly, is the Pa number. So there's a little ditty they're singing in the city, especially when they've been on the gin or the beer. If you have the patience, your own imaginations will tell you exactly what you want to hear. It's a light ditty that was originally positioned as a light ditty in the original musical, but Carol Reed, who had never done a musical in his life, man, I mean, this is a serious film director. They moved it downstream to this tension section where Nancy is trying to spirit Oliver Twist away from the villains. And so now she's using this as a cover. And so she has to get everybody all riled up. And now there's a tension and a dynamism to all of that. Oh, somebody's talking about, I'll have to interrupt. Jason and the Argonauts. Yes, not as good as Hunter from the, Jason and the Argonauts is classic on a variety of levels. It's relatively rudimentary by modern animation because it was using stop animation. But that's Ray Harryhausen. And that is him at his peak of artistry. And it's got a rip snorter of a score by Bernard Herrmann, the most neglected genius of the 20th century, who wrote from the Twilight Zone's theme to the Psycho theme from Alfred Hitchcock and all of that. He helped orchestrate our world. Citizen Kane was his first film score. He only won one Oscar, and it was posthumous for Taxi Driver. By that time, he was dead. And all of the fabulous scores, The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is one of the masterpiece film scores of all time. Bernard Herrmann is very different from the kind of music scores we hear today, which are wall-to-wall, Hans Zimmer-ish, operatic style scoring. And they can be good or bad. But Herrmann was a not subliminalist. You were intended to hear his music and know you were hearing it all through the movie. And they become a synergy that fuses with the film that's not there if that music isn't there. And there's nobody really quite like Bernard Herrmann. He had cut his teeth with Orson Welles at the Mercury Theater for the Air when he was working with very small orchestral palettes. He learned how to use harps and a violin, a tiny little xylophone, and that's all he needed. And he could produce an entire acoustic landscape that way. And he kept that up with a lot of his scoring, where he would have unusual orchestration. If you've ever seen, I'm a big Chitty Chitty Bang Bang fan, says Tim. I'm ambivalent about Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. It's got a favorite song in there. Whoa, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, da, 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 dun, dun, dun. But it was an attempt to kind of redo. Yes, it is from an Ian Fleming book. The book is quirky. I think it could easily be remade as a film. They tinkered with the plot a lot. All of the stuff that Gert Frobe played in the film, where the kidnapping of the children and all that kind of stuff, that was all put in for the film. They were basically trying to redo Mary Poppins. So they had the lead for Mary Poppins, not the woman, but the man. They had the people who wrote the music for Mary Poppins write the score. They had the director of Mary Poppins direct the film, I think. But it was produced in Germany. And it has a kind of Teutonic heaviness to it that doesn't quite get off of the ground. I love the little car that they came up with, but it needed a script editor, I think. And some of the numbers that went on way too long. The old bamboo number, which was obviously intended to be like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, it just went on too long, and it didn't help the movie any. And the character of Caractacus Pot in there was a bit of an idiot. And so there was a plot structure that was difficult in there. The car wasn't magical enough, which was the element that was in the original novel. Not only Fleming's story was hard to do, but all of Roald Dahl has been really difficult to transcribe into film. Okay, Dick was great at English accents, Nim says tongue-in-cheek. Yeah. Some about Trevor, Seven Brides for One Brother. Yes. Yeah, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers is another musical that I'm ambivalent about. It's an okay musical. It's highly regarded in musical circles, but it's just a little bit, it's okay. It's got some adequate songs. It's got a iffy plot. Filmed in CinemaScope. It's beautiful to watch in widescreen and all of that. But I've never been an enormous Howard Keel fan, I'm sorry to say. He's okay and pleasant. I think Kiss Me Kate is the best film he managed to do. That one, and it's got a lot of the plot subplot thing going, and it's got Cole Porter, so it's got a jaunty music in that way. But Keel, he was a little wooden in Showboat, which was a film that ironically needed to be filmed in widescreen. Holy moly, they should have made that a few years later when they could film it in Todd AO or something. It needed to be that, but it wasn't. Well. So anyway, there was my brief digression on film music and some of the little side issues on that. See what else we got going on here. Dick Van Dyke, he's a fascinating character. Everybody knows how terrible his accent is in Mary Poppins, and no one cares because he's just marvelous in it. There was an example, Disney personally supervised only 2 live-action films in his career. One was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and the other is Mary Poppins, and both of them are dead on target. He was extremely... Oh, how about Sound of Music? Yeah, Sound of Music is a fascinating one. There, it's intriguing. I had the luck that I have not only the DVD and Blu-ray versions of Sound of Music and Mary Poppins, but the Laserdisc versions of those. That shows you how far back I was collecting stuff when I had money. And the Laserdisc versions of Sound of Music and The King and I happen to have second audio tracks of just the music without the singing, music and sound effects. And that was really revealing because the guy that did the music direction for Sound of Music was Irwin Kostal, who had worked with Julie Andrews on Mary Poppins. And so they were used to working together. And the way he handled orchestration in Mary Poppins is totally different from the way Alfred Newman handled orchestration for Rodgers and Hammerstein in The King and I. There he's dealing with a bunch of non-singers. And Newman, who is, by the way, the uncle of Randy Newman, who is still doing music right and left, of the big Newman clan. There's a whole bunch of Newmans. They were infesting and fabulously talented people there at the music department at 20th Century Fox. Anyway, Alfred Newman basically carries the melodic line in the songs. The singers are on top of it. Marnie Nixon who dubbed for a bunch of people in Broadway, was dubbing for Deborah Carr. In fact, Marnie Nixon just died a little bit ago. And she sounded a great deal like Julie Andrews. Of course, nobody needed to dub for Julie Andrews. If you listen to the audio, the music track for Sound of Music, though, you'll discover that the orchestration is not carrying the melody. They let Julie Andrews carry the melody, and he is harmonizing to it in a way that's very, very different, much lighter, much subtler, because, boy, just let her pipes go. She can just run amok and carry it all completely with her fabulous sharpness, which, of course, she can't do now because she had that injury to her vocal cords because of an operation. And now, although she can sing, she can't sing anymore. And I can really feel for the distaste of an artist like that who is not able to use her instrument. My, yeah. Sound of Music was a fun one. It was the mega musical of all time. It was the thing that helped put the musicals back on the map, frankly. And it saved 20th Century Fox Studios after Cleopatra practically bankrupted it. It was the cash cow of all time. And Robert Wise, who had never done a musical before, wanted to tone down the syrupy quality of it. And I know you may think, what, isn't there already a lot? But that shows you how much it had to be toned down. For trivia buffs, the next time Sound of Music is on, wait for the scene where Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer are in the gazebo, the little house thing out in the woods, singing to each other their love after they decided to get married. And it's all done in silhouette. It's kind of like rain going on in the background. And there was a reason for that, because this was like the 5th or 6th take. Those two poor scamps couldn't keep a straight face during that song. They would break up constantly. It was originally intended to be normal lighting and all that kind of stuff. And they broke up again and again and again, to the point of where the director was about ready to pull his hair out. And he figured out to do it with the because they'd already recorded the soundtrack, of course, and that they would then photograph it in silhouette. With even there, though, you can see the smiles on their face. They're almost ready to break out again. In that, they just couldn't get through it without cracking up on it. Oh, I've always wondered about the German thought of. Oh yeah, I don't know about what the Germans thought of Hogan Heroes. It was a loosely based comedic version of Stalag 17, which is a Billy Wilder film, which was a very serious film with a lot of comedic elements to it. And for the time, remember, there were an awful lot of people in there. Robert Clary, whose parents were killed in the death camps, Jewish refugee, was in that show. And so he had to kind of wrestle himself with the role of playing a thing where the Germans are for laughs. And they had to be very, very careful about it. I'm a great admirer of Robert Clary. He's a wonderfully talented fellow. A nice role that he does was with Robert Wise again in Hindenburg with yipes, I can't think of Patton, George C. Scott, and Anne Bancroft. There's a whole bunch of wonderful character actors in it. It's a middling movie. It's got a little problem because it was trying to do special effects way ahead of what was feasible in 1975, but it's still a fun little film. It's got a nice, good score by Shore, that he would be doing a lot of much more interesting works later, but it's got a nice bit from Robert Clary that's worth just seeing it just for him as the little acrobat that survived on the Hindenburg. Batwatch or Baywatch? Yes, I'm just trying to catch up with the screens on in here. No, not Von Ryan's Express. No, Stalag 17, which I think had Robert Holden in it. Holden. Robert Holden. Can't think of his name right offhand. And both serial comic and others. I can't tell you anything about being a spoiler alert, but it was Billy Wilder, and I think 1950-ish or late 40s. I think it was before he did Sunset Boulevard. And he was at his Billy Wilder was at his peak form, and he would remain at that peak form all the way through the 50s until 1961 with 1, 2, 3, which was his last really well-balanced film. And then he just kept making movies for like 15 or 20 years and probably shouldn't have. Whereas Frank Capra retired at that point, and we can kind of relish the fact that he went out without overstaying his welcome. Oh, the Seahawk, Eric Wolfgang Korngold. Yes. Oh, Korngold was a fabulous character. His life was saved because his wife choreographed a film in Hollywood, and so he tagged along to do the music direction for Midsummer Night's Dream, and eventually he ended up staying in Hollywood, and as a Jew, he would have ended up killed. He was a super child prodigy. He wrote a fabulous opera, Die Tote Stadt, when he was like 12, and was a serious composer. And all of the music smugs regarded him as a sellout because he was making film music. But yeah, the Seahawk was just fabulous. I think that was the first of the collaborations he did with Errol Flynn. And then, of course, he did The Adventures of Robin Hood, which I think also won an Oscar. That is just quintessential Korngold. Now, Korngold is another one of those operatic composers. He's one of those where I haven't actually timed out how much of Seahawk is music, but virtually all but like 2 minutes of Adventures of Robin Hood's music. Continuously. And that style of operatic composing influenced John Williams when he revived that form in Star Wars. And that, of course, because you had a lot of people who maybe aren't as talented thinking that you've got to have music running continuously. And this divided the attention of it. Now, Max Steiner, the big rival there at Warner Brothers, was not so much an operatic composer. He was much more of a subtle subliminalist. He admired the late Romantic tradition of Mahler and Strauss and all of that. And his notion, and this John Williams also imbibed, was the idea that the score needs to kind of invigorate you. And so you don't necessarily notice there's music there, but you feel it. Korngold score, you're much more likely to actually be hearing the music overtly. Korngold was another fabulous character because he had absolutely perfect timing, whereas Max Steiner had to have a click track running where there would be a thing on the screen and a thing in his microphone, earphone, where you would hear the click, click, click metronome to figure out how to conduct to the score, to synchronize up with the movie. No, Korngold came in with his score in front of him and they started playing the movie with the orchestra, and he conducts the orchestra live, no click track, exactly perfectly matching what the movie's going to be. That man was absolutely astonishing. Korngold was just a killer. He was high enough in his contract with Warner Brothers that he could be kind of picky choosy about things. And I think he only did like 13 or 14 scores during the rest of his career. He recycled a chunk of his music from film scores into the violin concerto, and I think some of the stuff ended up in his symphony. But still, don't be ashamed, Korngold. Your masterpiece works were the things you did for film. You transformed the medium because of what you did. And don't be at all ashamed of the fact that you did films. No, those are masterful, absolutely fabulous scores. The score, even for a minor film like Between Two Worlds, is still evocative. And I can never think of the movie without, and sometimes I'll catch it if it's on television, just because it's got Korngold's music in it, and it's very evocative. Ah, my. There I got it. See, I just run on, and we got a little size sore over in there. Any questions for the RJ here? Any things you're saying? Why the hell am I talking about film scores? There's any possible directions on there that could go? Candy corn sigh? Oh, I'm not a candy corn man. I'm sorry, but then again, that's my personal tastes on things. I don't like caramel. I don't like peanuts. I love licorice. I love chocolate, particularly dark chocolate, including baker's chocolate, which I can eat straight. I know that'll shock everybody. Oh, Jim Jeffries. His show is very sharp. I just seen he's on Comedy Central now. I may be familiar with Ron White by sight, but I don't remember the name right off the bat. You probably have to pick up a picture of it. But Jim Jeffries, he's as sharp as a tack. Yeah, he's droll and perceptive. Samantha Bee is all. She's on tonight. I'll be recording her thing to catch that while I still got cable. and she is mega sharp. They've got some very, very good people knocking around on Comedy Central. Plus, I like At Midnight, but it's on hiatus, and so is Daily Show for the next couple of weeks. So I can't get my points from what's his name on At Midnight. See, I do try to interact with the cultural frame every once in a while, although I'm an old fart. And At Midnight's actually a handy spot because I get a pulse of what's going on in the world that I have no clue about. So they're talking about the current entertainers and all the current tropes that's popping up with Beyonce and all that. And I'm catching, I realize they're there, even though I don't give a rat's ass what happens with Beyonce. But at least I have some sense of the field that I'm not on. I at least know it's there. Yeah, we got a lot of good comedy is the toughest area. Satirical comedy, we're of course, unfortunately, in the golden age of, because we have the biggest target for satirical comedy that you would like, and you have to do it the way that you can keep sane. So Trumplandia is a boon for comedians. It pushed Colbert up to the tops of the ratings. Poor old Jimmy Fallon's had to grow a mustache and do more and do more shtick on his show. He's coming in second. I think he probably would have stayed up on top had it not been for Trump being president, because he's affable and talented. But I'm afraid we're in a time when you got to pay attention to the dark. And Colbert has got his finger on the pulse of the dark, and he won't let us forget it. Did you contact the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe to see if you can guest, RJ? I do not know about that. Yes, and I did not know there was an SGTU at all, let alone whether it was still going. So anybody want to go on my behalf to such a thing to find out if it's going, and putting in contacts, and anybody can get back to me at the #tip website. Paulogia used that technique. Sites, and you can go to. There's no feedback at the tortucan.com, but there are feedback things on the tortucanwordpress.com, and it works. Anybody that pops in there can drop in and say hi, or ask a question, or grump at me. It doesn't matter. I don't edit. A couple creationists made the mistake. Alex Byers, I think his name is, tried to joust with me for a while and discovered, I'm sorry, I know more than you on this subject. You're not going to be able to get any headway with me, buckaroo, with presuppositionism. Fallon is charming at times. He's good at shticks. He's very talented with singing. He's no great actor. That's for sure. I think James Corden is far more talented in that respect, and he's got a surreal, quirky quality to him that when Corden's on his role in the Sing Fest that he does on the road stuff, that's very, very sharp stuff. And he's got a kind of a cuddly teddy bear, a dark cuddly teddy bear quality to him that Fallon doesn't. But yeah, I like Fallon. I date from an ancient time, because I go all the way back. We used to watch Steve Allen on the old Tonight Show, and then Jack Parr. So it was already a long tradition in my family before Johnny Carson showed up in the 1960s. And then I've stuck with it ever since. I missed it when Johnny Carson left New York and went not live. There was an edge of your seat quality about the Tonight Show in its first 15 years because it was live. And so you saw what you saw. You saw a tape delay on the West Coast, but I mean, you still saw a live show. Okay, so somebody, whoever has the latest podcast, please, someone on my behalf, please contact them. Because if I do it, it'll be a matter of my saying, oh, gee, I'm a terribly clever person and I need to be your host. That sounds pricky. But if somebody else comes in and says, hey, RJ isn't going to bore you to tears, he's kind of interesting at times. And so you might want to look into that. Oh, yes. Well, let's Corden. I love carpool karaoke. Not sure about the rest of his program. Well, he's fun. One thing I do like about it, he follows that Graham Norton format of having all the guests sit together at the same time, rather than having the come out and plug your show and then disappear, which all the other talk shows do. And I like the conviviality of that. They don't always synergize, but every once in a while, something magical will happen in the way they're interacting with each other, and stories will come out and things will come out that wouldn't have happened if you didn't have everybody sitting there just on the couch jibber jabbering. Yeah, see, I'm missing completely Genghis Croft and all the way. I remember the old Monster Chiller horror theater parody that they did on Count Floyd on the old SCTV. Yes, Monster Chiller Horror Theater, I think. And the one that was the funniest, Count Floyd was showing the movie The Night of the Wolf. And the joke was that it was actually some Ingmar Bergman movie, and it was all black and white cinematography, and they were doing this hilarious parody of Ingmar Bergman with the clock ticking and the people staring at each other in profile, and they were going, and poor Floyd would have to jump in saying, "Oh, kids, that was really scary, wasn't it?" You know, when he's trying to rescue the fact that this isn't a horror movie and they're expecting a horror movie. And then on top of that, I can heartily recommend Svengoolie if you catch Me TV. He shows all these old shtick films, little parody jokes and stuff about it. But what's really wonderful about Svengoolie is he really loves the genre. And they'll give wonderful historical backgrounds of who the actors are and who the production people were and the stunt people at times. And so you get this background window into the world. And there's a genuine affection and interest that he has on the show, as well as some of the most pathetic puns. And I adore pathetic puns. So I can heartily recommend Svengoolie. And he's on Twitter, and I follow him on Twitter to boot. I have a polyglot set of interests, just in case you haven't noticed. Oh, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. Weren't all of those wonderful films silly? They would always involve some poor little kid, and Godzilla was now kind of like a pal and would go after some villainous monster, and they would all and it had all the elaborate model work that the guy in the suit would have to run into and collapse. In some respects, the more elaborate ones that were done, the remake from '98, which was and the newer remake, which actually wasn't too bad. It was fairly workable, have got spectacular visuals, but there's always kind of a delicious cheesiness. And I should recommend the original Godzilla, especially in its original Japanese cut. That this was a film of certain measure, and it had a certain element of gravitas, and some of the cinematography, they were clearly kind of being a little bit Kurosawa-ish. They were really attempting to do a fairly good job on it. And I well recommend watching that. And even the American short version with Raymond Burr, they did as best they could under the circumstances in kind of create a certain measure of gravitas. This was how the Japanese were starting to deal with Hiroshima. They didn't deal with it directly. They dealt with it by a side issue of this radioactive dinosaur running amok. That really was all an analogy about the dangers of atomic weaponry and the dangers of radiation and the usage of the science for vicious ends. And it was all analogous. So there's depth there that not just a simple monster movie. Oh yes, I love puns, and the no pun too cheap, no joke too pathetic for me. It's the highest and lowest form of art in any format. I always love a good pun, and there was a lot of writers in the old magazine of fantasy and science fiction. There was one whole story that was about these strange pun context, and the whole story was kind of like this guy whose marriage was falling apart, and and it was a science fiction context. You had a lot of really unusual material in science fiction magazine back in those days. That was all the time when a little later on Harlan Ellison was their film reviewer, and so you had a lot of interesting stuff from the ancient days, back before the internet, the interweb. They make TV screens for blastophores now. I haven't seen the new Power Rangers movie. I'm sure it'll have adequate special effects. Whether or not it has characters that are duller than dishwater, I don't know. Sometimes they can be clever. Maybe a place to plug RJ would be Dawkins Foundation. Thank you, Tim Hem. I've tried to contact Dawkins myself on occasion, but it's like a brick wall. He's got a zillion followers out there. And maybe if a barrage of people were to email him and say, hey, pay attention. Thing with Jerry Coyne. And he was just annoyed that I was trying to use the word Tortugan. And so I got kind of busted on that because I was plugging my website. Well, duh, because I'm desperate for money and support. So pardon me for trying to get somewhere, buckaroos. So there we go on that. I still pay close attention to Coin's stuff because he's really quite fascinating, and he does a lot of material on everything from biological subjects to lambasting creationists and the like, to his hobby horses on accommodationism and free will and all that, which is a whole interesting side issue. Oh yeah, yeah. Well, that'll do. Evolution Hour, and you've got everything that I've got on the websites, and any videos are. You'll notice none of them are restricted. They're all open domain. Everybody can trade and share and comment. I don't weed out comments. If somebody wants to come in and be rude at #tip, well, they better watch out, because I won't be rude, but I will fillet them. I'm not bad at that. You Cy, jump in here. You've followed me on Twitter exchanges. Well, how would you assess my ability to comment on people without losing my temper?
Actually, it's more effective than losing one's temper. If you can respond to someone who is being abusive with facts and data, it just gets them more angry. So I approve of your methods.
Yeah, and I think too, some of the people who do get angry are doing it because they don't have the data to do. So they just have to go snark back. Well, you did first. Whereas I don't have to do that. And of course, I'm not usually thrown off by their content, because I'm sorry, I've got 8,000 anti-evolution sources in my bibliography. I read more of this than they have. So I can kind of wait to see where they're coming from. But I do constantly probe methods questions. And an awful lot of the ones, as soon as I try to probe them on, well, where did you get this from? And did you fact check it? Whoop, boy, they go quiet in a hurry. But yeah, I strongly recommend that. There's a certain smug arrogance on my part that I don't have to lose my temper, because I can just figure out how to nudge them over in front of the trap door. Okay, there you are. Wait till you get the sentence at the end. Put that period in. Thank you. Clonk.
See, when I lose my temper, no one can tell, because RJ, you know, I'm always crabby and unpleasant.
Yeah, well, I've mellowed over the years, and in large measure, precisely because I discovered in my own personality that I would be much more likely, if I would bump into creationists in other contexts, which I have over the years. You're most likely to get peeved when they blindside you with something you didn't know, and so you have to kind of quick response. Whereas if you know their field well enough, and know their field, in fact, really well enough, that they can't pull the tricks on you that they do otherwise. Once in a while, I'll encounter somebody that brings up a topic that I wasn't initially aware of, in which case I'll research it and I'll peg it down. Like there was one that popped up about the, there's a molecule that looks like a cross. I can't remember the name of the stupid thing.
Oh, I remember that.
Every once in a while, the creationists will jump in with that. And so I did research on the thing. And of course, it's got a perfectly natural explanation. It just looks sort of crossy if you leave off most of the parts and not think too much. And sometimes it causes illnesses and other stuff when it does its little shtick. So it's a complicated bit. So it's a theodicy problem they shouldn't jump into. Oh, yeah, maybe tip would be something for Seth Andrews, though. Absolutely everybody out there who can think of things where it would be helpful, even if I'm not the talking head, at least some input, or people can react to stuff on things. I do like the idea of conversations. I still love the idea of conversation between Cy and I and a creationist, whether they're intelligent designer or old Earth creationist or young Earth creationist. It'd be fun to have, and Eric Hovind might be calmer than Daddy. Ross would be congenial because he is actually kind of a schlump and pleasant. The other ones, however, it's very difficult to get them. They like to be the talking head. Whereas I think I do quite well in interaction and Q&A, and where you have to challenge and have an actual conversation of things. I know I'm the talking head here, but as Cy well knows, I would like to have a thing where we would do the same format on the movie night, of having multiple video camera people come in, and they can put in their 2 cents worths and all of that. Yes, I can fill the airtime. Duh, I can talk while I breathe. But I really do relish having that real-time interaction where you can actually talk about something. And that's why I try to follow the material that's popping up on the discussion thing. But there's always a barrier between the typed word, the actual interchange that you have when you're talking face-to-face. Cognitive dissonance, Nim. Ah, yes. Whole interesting psychological subject on that one, cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias. We now know some of the brain systems, by the way, that kick in on cognitive dissonance and self-deception. There's an anterior cingulate cortex in particular. And by the way, that's a brain system that was originally developed in primates just as a social cohesion regulator that's guided and co-opted in our particular hominid species to make us annoying and allow creationists and Donald Trump to exist. I see we got a lot of Aaron Raw, Marty Mayer, Dark Matter, Seth Andrews, yeah, a panel. Yeah, I'd love to be on a panel. I do well on panel. I was invited as the atheist representative to Fairchild Air Force Base's discussion of faith issues in how people deal with that in the Air Force bureaucratic context. And they had a Muslim and Catholic and Protestant and Native American, and they had me as a representative of the secular bunch. And I think I acquitted myself reasonably well in that regard. It was much about their material as others. And particularly in the Air Force has had to deal with that. How that's going to change under the Trump administration is hard to say, because you've got the potential for the culture campers who never like the idea of like getting along with transgendered and people of the wrong religious faith. That may not be so cheery under the Trump administration than it was previous under the Obama years, because this was, I think, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, when that was conducted there at Fairchild here in Spokane. Just as an aside. RJ, have you ever been in a structured debate on evolution or any other topic for that matter? Oh, yes. One debate, and you'll find the link to it, by the way, at my TIP website. It was with a law professor. Alas, I would have loved it would have been on evolution, but it was on the Grease v. Galloway case, which was a prayer case that was then pending and was later decided in just exactly the way I suspected it would, with Kennedy being the deciding vote. And he was a law professor from a university out in South Dakota, and was a very conservative political one, and he had been posting, and he had apparently wanted to debate with somebody on his view on this, and they couldn't find anybody in Seattle to debate him. I'm going, what? They literally were scavenging by email to the other freethinker groups around the Pacific Northwest, and I found out about it because of the Inland Northwest Free Thought Society. And the president of that said, would you be interested in this? And I go, well, let me look. And so I looked up the case, and the ACLU had a whole listing of all the amicus curiae briefs and stuff on it, and I spotted all of the same characters from the anti-evolution movements, including the ACLJ, Jay Sekulo's bunch, who, by the way, is a lawyer for President Trump now. You see how all these things kind of connect together. Anyway, I thought I could have a fresh take on it because of the fact that the people who were supporting this prayer are almost exclusively culture camp conservative religionists, whereas on the opposite side, you had mixed bedfellows. Not only did you have the ACLU, but you had some Christian groups that were in favor of it, including conservative ones, who were the ones that were in favor of these 10 Commandment monuments, was on the side of the ACLU because they didn't want the state making a choice about what was an allowable prayer. And Muslims and others who were non-Christian who were parties to the thing on the side with the ACLU as well. So I went out there and drove over to Seattle, and Jim Hudlow just left as president of the INFS, accompanied me. And I came in, and I knew that it was going to be a 15-minute presentation, so I had edited down my presentation so that I could handle that, and I had it on a single sheet of paper, and I'd rehearsed it very carefully. And I'd researched all the publications of my opponent, so I knew what he had written, even on postings that he had done on conservative websites, so I knew his background quite nicely. And he bumped into me then at the introduction. He was still looking over his yellow notepads because he was obviously rehearsing because he wanted to make sure things would go well, whereas I already knew what the hell I was going to say. I'd already done it. So I was schmoozing with the audience. And when he met me, practice. And I go, I don't practice anywhere. I'm not a lawyer. And I got the impression that it flashed through his mind, wow, I'm a law professor debating a non-lawyer on a law subject in front of a class of conservative law students at a conservative college here in Seattle. What could possibly go wrong? Well, I asked to go first, and he let me. And you can see the thing itself to see how well I did. And the people there were thinking that I was a lawyer. Why? Because I studied how the lawyers constructed their arguments. I tailored things to fit their material. I knew how to put a laugh in at a particular point to try to get a reference in and all that. And when he got to his turn, he said, well, I will not try to summarize the facts of the case since my opponent did that so well. And so instead, he tried to ran off and figure out what of his he wanted to present. And the Q&A is all in there too. So I think I did quite nice. I literally had only 1 week to prepare for that debate. I knew diddly squat about the case beforehand. And so what you see as the result was pure #tip source methods approach, because of all of his law papers were available online, so I could check those out. I didn't have his book, but I didn't need his book because I'm sure it was just repeating what was in his law papers. He was very repetitive. I mean, 6 or 7 papers, and it's just the same argument over and over and over again. Yipes. And so it shows how well prepared you can do to approach it from a source methods direction. So does that answer your question on there? Yeah, I'd love to do debates. I think I do pretty good at them. And I can wing on the fly. I'm good at improv. I've been in theater, so I'm not afraid of a stage. In fact, the law professor was pushed out of shape because we had to sit down. The thing was structured till we sat down. He was used to talking from a podium, and that was throwing him off. I could lay down on the table if they wanted me to. It wouldn't matter. I could do it from the floor if they wanted me to. That's no problem. Venue is irrelevant for me. Yeah, Seattle Federalist Society, Patrick Gary. What's even more fun is if you go to Gary's website, he has a whole list of all of his speeches and lectures and debates. And he's never put me on it. Oh, yeah, geez, RJ, did you prepare much? I immediately did what I could, which I located all of his law papers. He had also done this stuff on this hyper-conservative website that normally does creationist stuff. And he was just going on and on and on about the rights of Christians and stuff. And I don't think he literally, I asked him at the debate afterwards, he literally was unaware of the creationist context of the people that he was bumping into. He'd never studied the subject at all. So I, as a background, knew his discussions on, I'd read through every single one of his postings on there to make sure I had a sense of where he was coming from. I didn't actually end up having to use it because the material that I had up front was able to handle the material quite nicely. I was pointing out the creationist backgrounds of the people, including geocentrist backgrounds in some cases, of the various people that are circulating around the people who thought the prayer idea was such a good idea, and pointed out why there were serious issues to be here that were relating to how we should deal with a secular society where you don't give any particular religious group a special privilege. And it's a bad policy. Is it going to probably continue? Yeah, but it's still a bad policy. Lined up with the 45,000 people getting to debate Kent Hovind. Yeah, wow, I know, yes. Well, I had a telephone call with Kent Hovind years ago before he was famous. I'd actually written off to him because my brother had seen one of his creationist tapes that one of his creationist friends had seen. So he got a copy of it to me. And I went through and analyzed it and wrote off to him down in Pensacola, Florida. And he wrote back. And he called me on the telephone, his dime. And we had a little chit-chat back and forth on it. So I had a little bit of an interaction with him from that little context. He's like a dervish in terms of his ability to jump past material. And Hovind would be a formidable one to go at in this sense. You really need to be up on his arguments. Fortunately, there are transcripts available of a lot of his videos. And some little guy who was a Kent Hovind groupie went ahead and posted a whole bunch of these little things. So you can at least kind of parse it out, because you've got to be able to slow him down to see what he has looked at. Because the disadvantage of a video and the disadvantage of me on a video is that you don't have footnotes, you don't have references, you don't have sources. Level that Hovind is crashing and burning. I discuss him a bit in a Dinomania chapter on his shrinking sun theory, and I think it cuts to the chase of the core of what's wrong with Hovind's way of looking at the world. He couldn't do long division. It didn't occur to him that his claim that the sun would have been orbit if all the hydrogen over billions of years hadn't burned up completely didn't figure out what kind of mass loss was involved. It's absolutely trivial. It wouldn't have changed the size of the sun much at all, like hundreds of a percent over billions of years. And this was real easy to figure out with long division. This wasn't calculus or anything. And the fact that he couldn't do that and then jump to another rock when I caught him on it is just vintage Hovind. And all of what Hovind does is in that category. Maybe you should start having an after show actually on RJ's channel, get people used to going there. I have no problem with that. Yeah, because this one's just a free-for-all time. The other one is actually an evolution hour should really be just an hour. I would be kind of a stickler on that. Yeah.
Evolution
but the debate aspect of it is, yeah, Hovind's debated a lot of people. Michael Shermer has debated him, and I think Ross has, and a few others. And Hovind is a dervish. He just is fast. And I can't think of many people anywhere at all. His son is just dull as dishwater by comparison. He's got all the tropes down in terms of presentation, but he's not a fast tap dancer. And he doesn't have the panache when you think of how he plays the audience. That's coming out of that old street preacher tradition that an awful lot of grassroots preachers do. And Hovind's good at it. I bump into Hovindistas way more than people who have read Michael Behe, I can tell you. And the people who actually interact at the anti-evolution legislation level, the people on the Dover School Board. These are not people who really paid close attention to the ins and outs of irreducible complexity. They did know about Kent Hovind stuff. These are all over the place. And although he was like a bad penny back in the 1990s, he is influential surreptitiously in that deep Coulter Camp subculture. Oh, somebody says got the book in the mail. Yes, yes, indeed. Could you put a link to RJ's channel in the chat? Yeah, that's, oh God, because I'm not on the thing there. Yeah, you'll have to do that. King Crocoduck versus Kent Hovind. I have not watched that debate. Yeah, if I were to do a debate with Hovind, I would actually want to watch all that to see how he deals with other people. In terms of the content, I can expect what Crocoduck would be saying and also what Hovind would be saying. Hovind is, you have to remember, Hovind is not a fact claimant. Offhand of anything Hovind has ever asserted that he came up with on his own. He copies other creationist arguments relentlessly. And it's a matter of tracking down where he's copying the information from. But in no sense I can think of from the material that I've seen of him, does he ever actually come up with an original thought. In that respect, Karl Baugh is an idiot, but at least he's coming up with original material. Jeffrey Tompkins is higher up on the food chain. He's a geneticist. He's coming up with fact claim stuff. To remind you, in #tip, I'm measuring this for the first time. There's only 36 people who are fact claimants. Evolution movement. In fact, I will pull up the website and I will. Let's see who they are. Let's go over here to bingo. Let's see. Those are the core group. Here we go. You got Steve Austin, John Bumgardner, Jerry Bergman, David Kavanaugh, David Kopej, the late Dwayne Gish, Nathaniel Jensen, Gene Leitner, Elizabeth Mitchell, the late Henry Morris, John D. Morris, Paul Nelson, Michael Orr, Jonathan Sarfati. Paul Nelson, by the way, is masquerading as an intelligent design guy, but he's a young Earth creationist. Frank Sherwin, Emil Silvestru, Andrew Snelling, Brian Thomas, Jeffrey Tompkins, Larry Vardaman, Carl Wheatland, Jay Weil, Kurt Wise, Todd Wood, and John Woodmarak. Then over in the intelligent design side, we got Douglas Axe, Michael Behe, William Dembski, Michael Denton, Michael Egner, Ann Gauger, Wolf Eckhard Lunig, Casey Luskin, Stephen Meyer, Fazal Rana, Hugh Ross, Granville Sewell, and Jonathan Wells. Ta-da! And that's only a little over 36 people. They're the ones that generate the claims. Everybody else is a copyist. They're very superficially copyists. But we've seen already in the things where stuff comes up where they're riffing off of Jonathan Wells' icons of evolution and his junk DNA stuff. And Casey Luskin qualifies as a fact claimant because he's the one marshaling primary sources on occasion. He's coming up with his own little wrinkles. And that's a danger when you cite on me. I pull him apart in slam dunk on his attempt to diminish feathered theropods. And Michael Denton, show you the daisy chain at work, Michael Denton relied on Casey Luskin as his sole source for casting doubt on feathered theropods. And the paper that Luskin cited, fortunately, I could get full text. Thank you very much, Internet. And discovered that he had misrepresented its contents. It's juicy. Scholarship is a contact sport. I may not have enough to eat all the time, but boy, I rev up in my work.
Hey RJ, could you send me? Could you in Twitter or something? Could you send me the link for if you have it handy? The link to the video of the debate you were talking about, because I do not have that. Yeah, send it to me. I'll post it here. I don't know if Satan is still here, but I'll put it in the description as well because he had asked for that. So tweet that over to me if you get a chance.
I'll zap that up while we speak. I keep all of these little temporary in a word processor that can do exactly that. Cool. And lunge at people. I find just look for Gary. Bum ba da ba da bum bum ba da bum ba da bum bum ba da bum ba da bum. No match. Come on. Oh, where are you? There. Debate with Patrick Gary. There we go. And I will have that with you in a moment. Yeah, I enjoyed the thing. I thought I did it well. I handled myself adroitly. I would have loved to have had. Okay, boop, there we go. And that should be it. We'll see how well that pops up for you there in Twitter, lawseattle.edu, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, in fact, I deliberately played to their humor. For one thing, I knew because they're a law bunch, I would just toss off references to law papers, law things like Epperson v. Alperson and all that, without explaining them. They would know, the audience would know them. So I don't need to actually explain them. And so it's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And then later on, I talked about the People's Republic of Berkeley, I think, because I knew that would get a laugh. When I was talking about political persuasions, and I got a laugh exactly as I'd intended. So I was playing the audience there without ever having to dissemble. I never say anything I don't believe, that I don't defend. That's why I can share with Richard Dawkins the fact neither one of us were debaters in school. Position I don't believe. So the idea that you arbitrarily take a thing. Have you ever seen these new debaters? There was a thing on 60 Minutes a while back. That apparently that's gotten hype. The debating technique is these rapid fire, super fast to see how quickly they can say it. And I go weird. I wouldn't be able to do that at all. No, slow down and think about stuff and defend positions you actually hold. Even if you believe crap, you're doing just as a tactical defense. And to my mind, that's not debating. That's argument jousting. I never could do that. Oh, how long is what? Oh, Paul will have to answer that. I'm not sure what we're referring to on it. With Paul, it was only about a half hour long. Did you need any other links for me to stick up there, Si?
We've had no other questions. All the other links are still in the description, like we usually have, to the various sites and the GoFundMe and the all of that sort of stuff. So no, I think we're good for the moment, unless somebody requests something new. I
came on first, and it was a 15-minute presentation, and then he did his 15 minutes. And then we had about a 15, 20-minute conversation back and forth for Q&A. Everybody there was treating me as if I was a lawyer, like he was. Ha, ha, ha. And I think I did acquitted myself well enough that I'd like to think that he flew back to San Diego going, lawyer, what happened? He never put me on that. I keep on checking every once in a while just to see if he stuck me on his list on that. So now it may be that he thought I was so inconsequential that he just didn't even need to bother about having my debate on my list there. But if he thought he did so well with it, why wouldn't he put a link up to it? Curious. Yeah, I'd love to debate Ken Ham sometime and show that I can do better than Bill Nye. That would be a fun thing to do, and they'll debate a lot of the other ones. But always know your target. If they don't have a paper trail, you got to watch their videos if they're on videos. The worst to debate is somebody that doesn't have a paper trail, because then you don't know what they're arguing. But the one nice thing about anti-evolutionists and ideologues in general is they are not exactly original thinkers. They do tend to repeat the same shtick over and over again. And that's, Gary was just a classic example of that. Because he just had a single line that he presented, and he did it again and again and again and again and again. So, wow, if I can't figure out where he's going to go in his argument, his stuff. Oh, we're getting some side lot on that. Slow, how fast are you speaking? Oh, I think he speeded me up a bit. He was taking the video. I don't actually talk that fast, and I don't think I recorded it that fast. So he kind of jumped me up a bit. Either that, or he was taking the video in his editing thing, maybe adjusted it up a little bit. But yeah, so I wasn't talking at quite that rapidity. It didn't bother me that it was coming off a little bit faster. I hope they didn't think I was on Benzedrine or something. But I can talk quite fast when I can get kind of revved up on that stuff. I can do that extempore. But the actual speed on the Paul video was not my doing. That was his adjustment. I think he did a splendid job on the graphics and anything to see a snippet of Cleopatra and Mary Poppins all in the course of events, was delightful in that as well. But I think his pacings and timings, the way that he did wipes and all that stuff. But he takes a lot of time. It takes him about a week to be able to pull that stuff off. And I give little kudos to that, Paul. Thank you much. Oh, how would you beat Bill Nye on that? Well, baked ham on Nye, hold the facts, please. The problem with Nye was that he didn't really know much about Ken Ham coming in. And he had to do a crash course on Ken Hamism from the National Center for Science Education. And Josh Rosenow helped brief them, and that's fine. But you can't get a crash course on knowing where somebody is screwing up. And also the context of things. I never had a chance to see the whole debate. I've only heard snippets of it and seen reports on it, so it's kind of secondhand on stuff. But one bit that would have just jumped out to me is when Ham put a big picture up on the screen. It was an image from the Creation Museum, and it showed Triceratops and a bunch of other ones with a bunch of little lines attached to them, and supposedly was showing the separate kinds. And to put up a dinosaur that way walks right into a trap, because the creationists have never thought through ceratopsid systematics in their own framework. No baraminologist has given a whack at it. And the fact is that you've got episodes going on buried down in that ceratopsid data, and you have the whole terrible problem of baraminology and its inability to work out how many kinds there are and use anything like a standard practice, even though they think they do. And so that's a minefield error on their part if you know the background. Thing knows diddly squat about baraminology, and I suspect Ken Ham knows nothing about baraminology, because he repeats stuff that ironically he shouldn't. He's repeated the horse claim when the baraminologists have conceded the horse sequence as a monobaramine years ago. So there are all sorts of potential minefields if you know the minefields are there. And Nye, he comes from an engineering physics background. He's not a biologist. He doesn't know a great deal about paleontology, and he doesn't know a great deal about the apologetics that's going on here. So you're trying to get him do a catch up in like a couple days on a subject matter that requires way more than that. You need to know what Ham has written and what he hasn't, and what he's covered and what AIG has covered and what he hasn't. So if he tries to defend the scientific credentials of his AIG, I would be ready to light into him on Woodmarapp and Snelling and Austin and all the other bunch, and Mike Riddle, his own bunch, are sloppy and inept scholars. Oh, glomming together with Joss Firestein. I'm not sure whoever that is. Yeah, I think there are endless opportunities for conversation and discussion on a lot of stuff. I think a useful discussion to be going on if you're genuinely trying to understand stuff and talk about stuff. I never go into a discussion with a creationist under the impression that I'm going to persuade them that they're wrong. Duh, that's not going to happen. That's not my object. My object is to fairly present my argument and to present it in such a way that anyone observing me debate with the anti-evolutionist is going to come away from it going, you know, one side seemed to have a lot of facts here and the other didn't. And I don't want to be on the didn't side. There's Cy. I'm talking too much.
Not at all.
Oh, Hovind calling KC not ham. Yes. There's debates. One of the reasons why the NCSA is down on debates, problematic in their results. Remember, the debate that Nye had with Ken Ham ended up with Ken Ham getting more money for donations. It beefed up his side considerably. It may have helped him go over the top in making his stupid art museum, in addition to a lot of tax breaks. But it doesn't necessarily translate into anything in that context. However, a lot of this is not conducted in what I would want to have as a debate context. I don't like the traditional debate format, for one thing, especially one where you don't have enough Q&A. No, Q&A is what I want to have. I was annoyed, frankly, that the Q&A after the Gary debate was only 15 minutes long. I think the most boring thing in the world is to have this ping pong match between your position for 10 minutes and then the other position and then your counter argument and then the other counter argument and then a short Q&A afterwards where you've chewed up most of your time. No, I think a conversation back and forth. Let the opponent pick the topic. That's another rule that I follow because they're going to pick their strong suit. Boy, what idiot is going to pick their weak case? So they're by definition filtering their argument on the very turf that you get to pick off their heavy gun. And if you also know all their weak guns and you can handle their heavy gun, the ammo you need. So they're self-selecting if they do it. If they got a paper trail, you want to read what that paper trail is. If they've got a video trail, you want to read their video trail to see how they handle stuff. But it depends on the format as to how things would be doing on that. I would be fun to see how we would handle the debate. I don't care about format. I'll adapt to whatever it is. But to me, the ideal is to have a conversation, a lot of Q&A, to where the audience gets to interact with you and you get to show how effective you are and how the opponent isn't. I still have never had a chance to try the Cambrian trick yet. I want to have the Cambrian beach trick, and I'm cluing it out. If you creationists are following me, you'll know the thing you want to avoid. I'm even playing fair, and that is, imagine you're on a beach in the Cambrian. There's a river coming down from a stream, coming down from mountains behind, and there's a little volcano going poop poop out in the bay. What you are seeing as life in the land, sea, and air in the Cambrian. That's what I would like to ask the creationist or the intelligent designer, to find out, do they actually have a map of time in their head? Do they actually have a clue as to what life was like in the Cambrian and what they were seeing? They relied on the descriptions in anti-evolution literature. They may have not a clue. And they might blunder and start talking about bears and lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Dissemble and say, well, that's an overly complicated subject and so forth. But you can lead into it easily. If they're going to bring up the Cambrian, you go, oh, audience, how many in the audience know what the hell we're talking about? No? Well, let's explain it. And that you give the setup. I have not yet, in a context where I've been able to try that trick yet to see what happens. I have tried the Exodus 21 trick. Stop me if you've heard this one. The very first year our secular group had a booth at the Spokane County Fair. And the Gideon Bible guy came over. And he made the mistake of leaning down. I was sitting in another chair. This was outside, and there was kind of breezy stuff going around. And there were two ladies that were personing the booth. I was sitting over on a corner. And the guy came in and leaned down at them and says, have any of you actually read the Bible? And the two ladies were a little bit nonplussed, but I waved spider to fly. I have. And so I steered the subject matter. I got up and had a little chit chat with him. And I tossed out this bit about morality. He was bringing that up. So I said, well, let's take an example of morality. And let's imagine there was, well, we don't have to imagine, there was societies, they used to treat slavery as okay. And basically what I did was give a description of the slavery rules in Exodus 21 and ask him to deliver his opinion of it. without telling him where it was from. And he failed at every possible point. First of all, here's the Gideon Bible guy who didn't recognize the slavery rules from Exodus 21, probably because he didn't know they were there. Second, he wouldn't venture an opinion about whether he thought it was moral or not. And so I'm going that not only can't he apply his biblical morality to something as critical as slavery, he can't even seem to apply his biblical morality to the Bible. And so the last thing, when I pulled the trap open and told him this is from Exodus 21, he then starts departing. And the last thing I call at him was, read your Bible, sir, read your Bible, which is not the sort of thing that a Gideon Bible guy needs to be told, is it? Any reactions to that side? Silence. Yes, the road to atheism is paved with Bibles that have been read cover to cover. I had the virtue that I came from a non-religious household. Although mom sent us kids to Sunday school, we were a bunch of kind of apostate Mormons. My dad left the Mormon church before I ever came along the scene. And we had a bunch of Mormon relatives and various others. My close friend with my mom's was a Roman Catholic and all that. But we literally never went to church, not even for Christmas holidays or anything. It was not a single instance of that ever happening. And we had a Bible and a Book of Mormon around the house, and mom never opened them at all. She could care less about that stuff. But she did send all of us kids to Sunday school when we got old enough just to see how we react to it, and we could make up our own minds. Kids actually got religious as a result, but I was the one that was kicked out for asking questions about Noah's Ark and the flood. Literally. And not because mom was prodding me or anything. She never had a thing about it. It was because I was collecting dinosaurs. I had read my encyclopedia stuff, and I was asking questions, and the poor schnook, maybe it was his early time teaching thing, but he told me, we mustn't ask questions like that here. And I vaguely recall saying, where exactly do you ask questions? And if not in Sunday school, isn't that what school's for? And so she immediately called my mom and says, do not bring Jimmy back next week. And that was the end of that. So I was a little annoying prick even from an early age on that. It took me a long time before I got to have a really genuinely rigorous method. Really, it wasn't until college. Frankly, I had a lot of cockamamie beliefs that I would hold, psychic phenomenon stuff, my Velikovsky phase. Oh boy, I should tell you about that sometime. But they all were learning experiences, because in retrospect, it really showed me internally how I'd gotten wrong on them and how to avoid that in future. Put me on an even keel. But the most influential teacher then in my life was Professor Barnes, my historiography teacher in the history of history, and always used primary sources. That was his bugbear. And that ultimately turned out to be the universal key, is don't depend on secondary sources. And if you do, don't forget you're depending on a secondary source. The moment you confuse a secondary and a primary source, you are on the road to perdition, young man. Oh, let's see what comments are popping up in here. Oh, Buster the atheist pug was demanding food. Ah, yes, yes. Well, RJ the atheist has to finish his spaghetti, but I'm too busy enjoying the time here. Yeah, no, I never bumped into a full-blown young earth creationist thing. I'm not sure that the Sunday school teacher, it was sort of just vaguely the flood happened thing, or maybe kinda, and he was very vague about it. That was the whole problem. And I was wondering, where exactly were my dinosaurs on the ark? If I'd known then what I know now, I actually had a little therapsid, Sphenecodon, in my dinosaur set, and Dimetrodon, which is on the reptile mammal line, that if I had been up on my knowledge of 2017 in the 1960s, I could have made life even miserable for that little schmuck. But this was not information that would have been readily available back to a kid in the 1960s, where the best I could do would be general stuff, the encyclopedia and some little books that I found in the library. But all the big dinosaur revolution, that took place in the 80s. And that's when I suddenly could have dinosaur models that were to scale and all this stuff. So that was just a revelation. And then in the decades since then, so much of the information now becomes online, so you can acquire all this stuff independently without having to worry about secondary redaction. Wow, oh, this is a golden age for us sciencey researchers. Yeah, I still our family, because we were all pretty much free thinkers. We didn't have any tension in that, and that's not true for an awful lot of people. If I had come from a very religious family and had to buck that, that would be bad and very awkward. And there are a lot of members of our free thinking community around here that I bump into that tell horror stories about they're excommunicated by their family and they don't want to have a damn thing to do with them because they've lost the religion, or they've talked about evolution and all that. And I can sympathize with that. There's a tremendous toll that would be taken on how tense Thanksgivings are when we visit, knowing that I am one of those people who do not accept. I suppose I've had an odd influence on my niece over the years. She's still a believer in God, but she's not nearly as conventional Baptist as she used to be. And even her conservative husband, I think he's still religious, but boy, he has he's reached a stage where you could have knocked me over with a brick when he said, I can't vote for any Republicans anymore because they're all anti-science. I'm going, sorry, but nice of you to notice though, because he's always been a science geek. Yeah, that's all. Every family member, if you come from that kind of a context, and remember, most atheists come from religious families. Duh. There are not enough freethinker families out there to spawn all of that. Most of them come from the fact that they read the text. Some of them have a kind of slow boil reaction after another, and then finally they realize, they don't actually believe it anymore. And then others have kind of like an epiphany moment, something that can do tragedy or circumstance where you really come face to face with theodicy. Certainly in Darwin's case, a factor was the death of his daughter. And, it was easier for him to decide there wasn't a God at all than that any God could exist or would be worthy of worship that would have let his daughter die under those circumstances. And you can see that theodicy issue. For me, a bit is Alzheimer's. What a nasty thing to do. Never mind the fall and all the other claptrap that you get into the theology. You don't need to have Alzheimer's as a disease, thank you very much. And it is one of the most insidious, nasty things because it's as debilitating for the survivors as it is for the person afflicted, because you literally see your loved one forgetting you are there, and that all those love connections and things that you would have had, that's absolutely nasty. So I would contend as a theodicy issue that any God that could permit a world of Alzheimer's to exist, let alone have intelligently designed it, is not worthy of worship, even if it is the big G. It can be just a bully and send you to hell. That was John Stuart Mill argument, that if a God can send me to hell, saying that God is doing something that's bad, that if a human being did it, it would be considered bad, then to hell I will go. That was his position. Oh, by the time I read everything Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov had published, yeah, I was probably behind on that. I didn't read everything from Robert Heinlein. I probably read more Isaac Asimov than Heinlein. I was actually a Andre Norton fan. I come from the ancient days when in the 60s and 70s, there were two big blocks of science fiction groupies. And they were the Heinleiners versus the Nortons. Andre Norton, by the way, also has a nom de plume of Mary Norton, her real name, and Bedknobs and Broomsticks, the Disney, is based on her book. So she straddles the line between fantasy and science fiction. It tended to have a lot of psychic phenomenon and stuff in that. So I had read a lot more of Andre Norton by the time I was 12 or so than I had read Robert Heinlein. Robert Heinlein was not as gripping for me as a kid growing up. And I've read very little. I tried to go through Verne. Verne's very boring for a kid. Boy, I mean, when you read the species of fish swimming by the window, as Aronnax describes them in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, you realize the movie's much better. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The Bible, most boring book I've ever read. Yeah. Not nearly as boring as the Book of Mormon. Let's be fair. And the Quran is a really heavy, long read. But if you really want a hilarious guide, is Robert Crumb, I think, the Randy pot smoking illustrator from the 60s. He did just a hilarious illustrated Genesis, and he takes every single verse. He illustrates the whole shebang. And when you see it parsed that way, to where you can't avoid all the begats and you can't avoid all the references to circumcision and foreskins, but you're forced to see it because he deals with everything, it's actually a more persuasive argument for why it's weird. He just fairly illustrates all the things. He's not making editorial comments or anything on it. He's just illustrating the whole shebang. And if you can manage to plow your way all the way through Genesis without going, whoa, this is strange, because you tend to get just the Cecil B. DeMille moments, you know, your Tower of Babel and the flood and all that stuff, and forget all of the vast amount of text that's the weird circumcision and begats and all of that. That makes it much more complicated and peculiar. But yeah, it's a great one to get. Oh, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Yes, that's the one Robert Heinlein novel that I am pissed off has never been made into a movie. Wow. It's in a time when Heinlein was getting really verbose. Jubal Harshaw novels and all that. God, those things just run on forever and ever and ever. Even the Stranger in a Strange Land thing is rather tedious. But Moon is a Harsh Mistress, I think came out in '65, is a really tight book. And Hale, the robot machine, the computer, Mike, I think his name is, the wonderful bit with the guy that's got the interchangeable parts because he's got a prosthetic, comparatively easy to do with digital these days. It would be a snap. So from a visual effects point of view, it'd be much easier to do. And even the low G, the 1.6G stuff, could probably be handled much more effectively in a digital context with wire work, and that it could probably be done a lot of it blue screen, like the battle that goes on in the Bon Marché department store. We had a Bon Marché department store in Spokane, which is why there was always a weird resonance with Heinlein on that bit. But I won't give anybody the plot twists away in the story. But yeah, it's a very well worth done story. And next to A Canticle for Leibowitz are the two science fiction novels from that period that I've always been frustrated were never put into films. Now, could be easily tackled today. Of course, for science fiction, I might as well rant off on my all-time favorite science fiction movies. My super duper favorite is Quatermass in the Pit, aka 5 Million Years to Earth. And that's one that's not as widely known. It's occasionally shown on TV. I think Turner Classic Music Movies trots it out once in a while. It's only sporadically available on DVD, and I don't think it's ever come out on a Blu-ray. There was a nice Laserdisc of it done, though, with an audio commentary by the director and the screenwriter, Nigel Neal. And it's the most ingenious science fiction alien invasion story ever. Could easily be redone with superior special effects, but you're not going to beat the acting and the creepy plot line of the thing that did. It was the most expensive Hammer film. Yes, Mycroft Holmes. Mycroft Holmes. I have to jump. Yes, the smarter brother. He was always regarded, Sherlock always regarded Mycroft as smarter, and it's been one of the tropes in all the pastiche Holmeses. If you look at 7% Solution, which is a marvelous film that was written by Nicholas Meyer, that had Nicole Williamson as just a really spectacular Sherlock Holmes. Mycroft Holmes in that is brilliant detection as well. He is just as observant as he was. And if I may plug Phileas Fogg, my novel, Phileas Fogg, there's a brief section where Sherlock Holmes and Mycroft Holmes figure in there. So I get them in. Buckaroo Banzai. Yes, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai. That's a guilty pleasure for me. You will either love The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai or you will think this is the stupidest movie ever made. There is no middle ground. But I am very fond of it. It's quirky. It's droll. String budget. The producers didn't know what the people were doing, and they were putting in little in-jokes to make sure whether they were checking the dailies or not. They were having all of this in-joke about the Orson Welles War of the Worlds broadcast. It had a lot of, became big stars from the guy that did the music. I think James Cameron worked on it in some of the, and Greg Ginn, who did the special effects model work, he became a major figure in the special effects field after that. And it's just a delicious, silly little show that I'm very fond of. How many science fictions do you know about rock band brain surgeon physicists who encounter an alien transdimensional invasion, and you get to see What? Oh, yipes! Who plays Dr. Lizardo? Oh, I suddenly forgot his name. One of my favorite actors, John Lithgow, as Dr. Lizardo, doing this just hilarious Mussolini impression. Oh gosh, it's a guilty pleasure movie. I will be a defender of it. Yes, indeed. Oh, Monkey Boy. Yes, laugh while you can, Monkey Boy. With what's his name from Back to the Future plays it very, very early. An awful lot of very early actors are just doing their little stuff in there. John Lithgow and Peter Sellers, fucking awesome movie. That's a different one altogether. What was the one they were in there on that one? John Lithgow and Peter Sellers together in a movie. Remind me, AJS. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a film they appeared together with. I don't know whether Lithgow was in Being There. Might he have been in that? Sellers, sad character Sellers. He had very little self-esteem, and he only kind of came alive when he was doing his routines and acting. And he was very desperate to be recognized, to do something that he was well recognized. And he did very good dramatic turns. He was in Lolita. What's his Casino Royale was intended to be a straight movie, and he was kind of pissed off that he didn't get to just play James Bond in it. Christopher Lloyd. Yes, thank you very much for putting that in. God damn it, the guy who played Robocop. Thank you. Yes, Weller. I think his name is Weller. Yeah. Thank you. You're right there on top of me. Yeah, and he's still knocking around as an actor. I think he does voice narrations over on other things. He was kind of a deadpan, droll actor. Another thing that's interesting from a film music point of view is the end credit scene. Delicious little thing where all the actors that played in the show come marching onto this abandoned Los Angeles River thing in Los Angeles. And it's just a sweet little reprise with the music that goes on during the end credits. It's a wonderful example of one where you need to see past the end of the movie about that. I'll agree. The Panthers were good. Yeah, that was one of his sad bits about the fact that he got typecast as that, and he had a love-hate relationship, more hate than love, with the director of the films. Yipes. Married to Julie Andrews and Blake Edwards. And they got sucked into it because the first film, A Shot in the Dark, not Shot in the Dark, The Pink Panther, of which he was just a minor character, was immensely successful. And they then quickly did A Shot in the Dark, which took a non-Clouseau subject and turned it into a Clouseau thing. And that's the one where he starts having more of the accent and brings in Cato and a few more, plays up that element, so that the cliche version of Clouseau is starting to form really in the second movie. And then years pass, after which Blake Edwards has had a great many big budget flops, and so did Sellers. And as a necessity to make a living, they came together and did the next Pink Panther movie, where they had, what's his name from The Sound of Music, Christopher Plummer, playing the David Niven role, which I think David Niven by then was dead, so that explains why they didn't do that. And at that point, they continued to do film after film whenever they kind of needed the money. And Sellers' ambivalent role about it, and he was hard to work with, and Blake Edwards found him hard to work with for a variety of reasons. And so that the films are much more amusing to see than they are to think about how troublesome they were to make. Yeah, it looks like the Darth Vader auditioned for Bogo Cop after being deconverted by Luke. And yes, that was a strange, there was a little bit of a look to that. I think maybe if they check back, either one or the other one may have been riffing off of the look of potato head, Humpty Dumpty look of Darth Vader when he pulls the helmet off in the third film. I can't remember which one was filmed afterwards, whether RoboCop, I think RoboCop was made after the third Star Wars film, but I can't remember right off the bat. So the chronology would matter on that one. Daddy Marcos in the last Star Trek. Oh, yes, indeed. All the Star Trek films have interesting turn to them. They've got their ups and downs. All the ones that were the even-numbered films tended to be the good ones, and then the odd-numbered ones were the ones that had troubles. To some extent, because Paramount would often rush them into production. And even the heavily lamented Star Trek V, which actually had a lot of interesting concepts knocking around, but it needed a bit of a script editor, and it needed a little more finesse with the special effects department because it was rushed into a December release, and that made a stuff that they had to kind of do quick. Same thing happened with Star Trek I. I like the fact to see the director's version of Star Trek the Motion Picture. It's a good one to see because he actually got the rights where the studio went ahead and gave him the money to do the film the way he wanted to. So he was able to redo some of the special effects and correct some of the goofs and re-edit the sound and do a lot of little things. And it's more like what he intended to do with it. And that's very, very rare to happen in Hollywood. And the fact that Robert Wise was able to do a working version of it. And to some extent, the same thing happened with Richard Donner and Superman, where they were able to cull some of the material so you could get a little bit better flavor. Richard Donner was thrown off of the Superman when the studio got quibbled with him about it, and they brought in a new director to handle all that kind of stuff. And Donner was always pissed off that he couldn't do the second Superman movie the way he'd intended to, and there was a lot of plot shifts and all that, and I think he would have done a better job on it. Need a starship. Yes, that's the interesting core of Star Trek V. And it relates to a lot of stuff, that misplaced concreteness. Why it afflicts creationists more than intelligent designers. It's why do you have to be so persnickety to try to figure out all the physical mechanisms of the flood? Why can't it just be a magic miracle? Why does God need a starship? Sums up the theodicy problem, the misplaced concreteness problem of an awful lot of religious thinking very, very nicely. And it's one of the reasons why it was a little bit controversial, because of the fact that it was going after God in a way that was considered inappropriate. But it was an expensive movie to make, into production, and it had some awkward problems. There was a script editor needed to kind of finesse with it at various points. There were some scenes that probably could have been the whole row, row, row your boat thing probably could have been tightened up quite a bit, you know. So anyway, the second and fourth are probably the nicest ones of the group. Second is Nicholas Meyer, the guy that saved Star Trek. And the last Star Trek lost me when they destroyed the enemy with loud music. Oh yeah, there's some. It's hard to do really original screenplays and original storylines on stuff, but this is true of everything. And the Star Trek canon is always tricky to come up with. The same thing is true for Star Wars or any other material, even Doctor Who. But if you develop things in terms of rich characterization, and if you've got a tightly packed conceptual frame where you can execute it ingeniously. Today, of course, both the curse and the blessing is that we've got special effects that are so sophisticated that if you can imagine it, you can do it. But the question is, do you need it? And how many flicks come down the line that are visually spectacular, but they're just ghosts? And line that's got a little bit of interesting twists to it, even if it may be a little bit overblown. I have to say, somebody that I'm awfully fond of, and I mean curious someday if I live long enough, is to see the next film that's just coming out, is the guy that did The Fifth Element, and he also did Lucy. Stories with that have interesting twists and turns to them. Lucy is rather too long for its own good and needed to be tightened up, but there are interesting concepts knocking around in it that shows that it's more interesting than it deserves to be. And the same was true of The Fifth Element. It's grand Baroque space opera, but it's got a very nice cast, and you care for the damn characters in the course of it. You're just kind of pulled along, and it's surreal and quirky and heartfelt all at the same time, and that counts for a lot for me. And I cared about it. Oh yeah, well, nothing lasts forever. But if they're clever at it, I think have fun with things. I like a good show. I would still recommend that people do A Canticle for Leibowitz and The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, but handle it. And plus, they need to do The Paralogues of Phileas Fogg. Damn it, what a great movie that would be. That would be a great miniseries for HBO or Netflix. Be actually fairly easy to do today. It would be much. It doesn't require gigantic crowd scenes. There's no giant battle scenes. You got to do some visual and digitals for things like the Great Eastern and some of the spots, but a lot of it can be done green screen. It would require very good sound mixing and the like, but it would be well within the frameworks of what they can do on television today. Be a fairly straightforward little production, and of course, the author certainly needs the money. Oh, Galaxy Quest has often been called the best science fiction. It's fun. It is a pastiche, after all. It's heartfelt. And as Sigourney Weaver said, she wanted to be in a movie that she could take her kids to, and you can. It's got a lot of nice sweetness to it, and Alan Rickman, as always, is just marvelous. I don't rank it as one of my favorite films. It's just, I don't mind spotting little bits and pieces of it when it's on television. But it's a fairly light plot. It's not thought-provoking in a way. I have to confess, of course, that a lot of the science fictions I resonate with most are ones I saw when I was very young. And I think that's probably true of anybody, that it's stuff you see in your formative age will have an impact on you, its objective status. So, oh, not sci-fi, RJ, Star Trek movie. I can tell you the upsides and the downsides of Star Trek, the motion picture. The downside was that it's a genre, a form that was really outside of Robert Wise's expertise. He likes political stuff. And so The Day the Earth Stood Still and the Andromeda Strain and the Hindenburg and Sound of Music is about Nazis. There's a political hook into the story that's he can get in. And he didn't have that in Star Trek. And that was always a problem. They had a novice special effects team that were just learning their sea legs on there, and the thing went out of budget, and it was it was a mess to produce. It was just a chaos to try to get the thing into production and to get it out by December. But I saw it in the theater, and for all of its flaws, when you saw the Enterprise and you saw the cast of the Enterprise, you immediately know that you can see these people on a big screen, that this can carry forward into the same way that a Star Wars carries on the big screen. You don't feel that you're just watching inflated television. And then the guy that saved Star Trek was Nicholas Meyer, because he came in and said, get rid of the pajamas and have people read books and have Kirk have glasses, and let's humanize things and have some Shakespeare and Moby Dick quotes. And he brings in that incredible synergy that I'm an enormous admirer of Nicholas Meyer, and both as a screenwriter and as a film director, he's an intellect. He is a quirky tactician as to how he puts pieces together in ways that you've never seen before. And oh, the Orville, it's like a TV series with the Galaxy Quest feeling. I'll see how that works out too. Plague. Yes, that's an old 1970s science fiction about these weird little bugs that go around farting things that kill people, as I recall. Bradford Dillman was in it. Low budget film, not a great film. There are a few oddball, low budget science fiction films that are worth the thing. Of course, Quatermass in the Pit is low budget, although for Hammer Films it was big budget, but it was still low budget by Forbidden Planet standards or Fantastic Voyage studios. But a quirky one that a lot of you may never have thought about is Quest for Love. It was a science fiction in the 70s with Joan Collins and a lot of cast of people that you will recognize, but not by name, including the guy that played the sidekick of Indiana Jones in so many of the films, all the way down to the end of the series. It's from a John Wyndham story, and it's about this physicist who's knocked into an alternate universe and falls in love with the doppelganger of a woman that he hasn't even met in his own universe. And it's an ingenious story. And it's way cleverer than it has any right to be, even though it's a relatively low-budget flick. filmed kind of on the fly, and it's one of my little guilty pleasures. Was Roddenberry a deist? No. Well, functionally an atheist. He might have had some kind of vague Einsteinian God is nature kind of thing, but as far as I can tell, he was a non-believer, and he would slip those sorts of elements in very, very gently. The Star Trek canon, of course, has been very touchy on a lot of things. The one area that it's been it won't deal with is gay sex. That every time there was the hint of a gay character in the story, it got turned into a straight person. One place where man has not gone before, and that is a recurring gay character in there. They had lesbian sex and odd elements in the Next Generation series and others where they kind of played off with it, and some of the symbiont elements with Dax flirted with some of these little things, but really the series avoided touching that third rail more than religion, because it really would hit some of its supporters who were very conservative religious. And they've stuck very, very clear. Paramount just gets antsy at the bottom line on that one. Who mourns for Adonis? Yeah, that's the bit of another Greek god that was just an alien entity that had a power generator, and when they pulled the plug on the batteries, there it goes. Yeah, there was a chapel aboard the Enterprise. You would find occasional worship scenes popping up, but nobody was overtly religious much. It was just kind of there generically. And Roddenberry himself was a free thinker, as was, I think, Majel Barrett, who is still knocking around. And I think quite a lot of the cast members of the various series have tended to be that way, and it's tended to pop up more ever since. But yeah, it's the Star Trek world bumps into that in a way that Star Wars doesn't, because after all, it's got this kind of mysterious mystic force, and who can forget those midi-chlorians? Oh, the New Voyages, Blood and Fire. Yeah, that's if it's something that requires money for me to see, I'm screwed. on free cable, or the things that I can actually get to. I was at least able to catch the most recent Doctor Who's, because that was showing up on BBC America. And I got to see Legend. Really interesting. That's a very quirkily done, intense, very well crafted show. Dirk Daly's or Dirk whatever the holistic detective agency that was on BBC America. That's the one from the last work that what's his name that did Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy did. Very quirky and ingenious and fun. That was one that it took a bit to slide into it, but for me, it was well worth watching. It had a wonderful cast in it. Form you RJ, but Major. Oh, I'm sorry, 2008. Yeah, okay. Well, I hear she was ubiquitous, because, of course, she started out as the #1 character in the original pilot. To axe, because the studio said, listen, we can accept an alien or a woman in a position of authority, but not two crazy things. So they had to have the alien, and they put the cool, collected #1 character as the personality of Spock, because if you look in the original pilot, Spock smiles and has emotion. So they merged those together, and she became the nurse and also the voice of the computer. And then, of course, Deanna Troy's mother, and of course had married Roddenberry along the way. But yes, 2008, it shows you how long ago. Yes, Dirk Gently's holistic thing. Douglas Adams, thank you. My brain farts can come in on there. It was a very frenetically done series. Travel and transdimensional things and stuff with a Swiss watch plot. Humorous and creepy all at the same time. Wonderful cast. Everybody in it is just very intense. A lot of people who had never really done science fiction before are showing up in this, and the pacing and structure of it, either hate it or you'll be a friend of it. Yeah. Oh, it doesn't require money. It's on YouTube. Oh, okay. Well, drop me a link to it in the Troubles in Paradise site, and I'll see what I can do. His voice in all the series of movies till the first J.J. Abrams one. The one thing I quibble with the Abrams Star Trek is that they went for that antiseptic white interior. That I was really kind of fond of the color coding aspects and the kind of friendliness that there was. You have to remember how shocking the Enterprise was to somebody who grew up in rockets with fins era that I was. And the moment that show came on screen, and I saw this fabulous ship that had no landing capability, that had teleporters to land with, that had no rocket fins, that had nacelles that were power units that were separated, and all of that interior bridge that was logical in terms of the way the different zones were spread out, that Star Trek had an enormous influence conceptualize the interior space and the way that you could lay out a spacecraft. And ironically, the Enterprise in part was just a necessity, because they tried to swing the budget for landing the damn craft week after week after week, and the budget for doing the special effects opticals were just off the wall. So they said, okay, order instead. We don't actually have to land the ship. And so that became a virtue of necessity. And then all of the stuff with the holodecks and things in the later series and the replicators came about, following up on the logic of what happens if you have a teleporter system. So a lot of Star Trek came about by the accident of that. Yeah, oh, well, that lens flare stuff was intentional. Yeah, dear Abrams, for good or ill, is just addicted to it. And jiggle cam. In fact, they had, when they did the special effects on the first movie, they had to do a pseudo jiggle cam, because all the special effects were done with digital, and they had to figure out a way to artificially generate not only lens flares, but also jiggling as if he was using a handheld camera to film the digital effects. These little lens flares that would be consistent with the lens flares that he was obsessed with live action. So yeah, there's a whole and I'm not an oracle. I just listen to the audio commentaries and the special stuff on the DVD and Blu-ray thing, where they explain all the little fun and games and stuff. Abrams is a talented cuss guy, and he makes his stories want to be human connections to things, and that's the strong heart of it. And if anybody could manage to pull off a reboot of both Star Trek and Star Wars, and do it without getting clunky, he's the good guy for the job. Oh, New Voyages, they got what is now a few episodes. George Takei, Walter Koenig, and Grace Lee Whitney. Well, Koenig just died, I think. Grace Lee Whitney, she's been around forever and looks damn good for her age, because she was showing up. In fact, I just spotted her in an old episode of 77 Sunset Strip. So she is somebody that's managed to age ever so gracefully, and she was a beautiful, graceful woman as a young woman, and she still is half a century later. Lee Whitney. Oh, well, now there was a good amount of time. Good gravy. We have been at this for almost 2 hours. Are you thinking we should pull the plug on it, or can we wander on for more? You've been quiet there, Si.
Well, for this specific day of the week, nobody comes here to hear me. They come here to hear you. So for this reason, I've been remaining relatively silent. But
well, don't object to jumping in if you have something to say. I mean,
well, all right. I'll tell you what, in the future I will do that, but I will need some help from you. If maybe I know you don't need to, but breathe.
No, you'll notice I don't need to breathe, and so you will have to go, "Oh, Jim, hold a moment," and just jump, please. I will not take offense at it. You know, I realize that I can run on, because I like a stream of consciousness. What you're seeing me do here is I'm wandering around my memory palace, and I'm then looking over there, and I see something on the screen, and suddenly, kaboom! Oh, Grace Lee Whitney died 2014. Oh, okay, she's also just recently. Yeah, that's sad. I'm just following one thread that leads to another, that leads to another, that leads to another, and hopefully not terribly boring. But there's been an awful lot of stuff. I'm interested in so many bloody things. I'm fascinated by the craft of how films are made, the ins and outs of how the stuff is done, how the music is done, how the special effects are done. And I've always been enjoyed to see how the trick is done. I'm often more impressed, more a work that took troubles to make, where you don't see the troubles. I may have mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. If you've ever seen the From Russia with Love, the second James Bond movie, It's got a wonderful performance by Pedro Armendáriz, who plays the Turkish Secret Service agent in it, and he practically steals the show. He's absolutely wonderful in it. And I can never watch that movie without realizing that he was in excruciating pain every single moment he was on screen. He was dying of cancer. He had accepted the role only because his family needed the money. Delivers this charming, gracious, wonderful performance. And to know what was going on behind the camera absolutely alters the way I can never think of that movie the same way because of that. Silence.
Indeed. Perhaps that is a good indication that a 1 hour show and then a 2 hour after show might be sufficient for this Wednesday. What do you think, there, Chief?
Yeah, I think we can probably call it in. It's coming up on 8 o'clock here.
All right.
Where you are.
Yeah, it's about 11.
Before you hit the witching hour.
At 11 plus, I seem to have forgotten to have food today. I'll have to do something about that, I guess.
Yeah, well, I still have my spaghetti to fix. A shameless plug, please, anybody who can, either at Patreon or the GoFundMe, and you can find the GoFundMe at the hashtag tip website. And at the very least, stop in and say hi. If you're not following me on Twitter, please do so. Everybody in the world, anybody who wants to pester Richard Dawkins or Neil deGrasse Tyson or anybody else with emails saying, there's this old fart in Spokane that you might want to pay a little bit of attention to. He's not a jerk.
Agreed. I believe we will all have to put some effort into that. And, all right. Oh, hey, you know what? By the way, I don't know if you've all seen this before. Here's a little commercial for you. See this little Patreon account down here for RJ. Like we've said before, do what you can, as I'm sure everybody does, and spreading the word to people who may not have been exposed to the efforts of RJ. Spreading the word would help them a bit as well. So, right, there's the commercial. And
yeah, we can do it with numbers. We've got the numbers. We just have to connect together. And by all means, don't forget, over in Culture Camp Land, they know how to play this game really well, and they do it really well. And are we going to let them get away with this kind of thing in a way that we can't do? Can't we do at least as well as they do? Yipes! I'd be happy to get 10% in a year what Ken Ham pulls down every year. Do you realize he gets $150,000 a year salary and roughly $50,000 a year perks? Answers in Janice's operation. Holy moly! Could I do with 15 grand popping in would double my income.
Indeed. All right.
And Steve Meyer pulls down 150 grand at the Discovery Institute. So, I mean, if I had no integrity and an ability to keep my head up my ass and pretend to be an intelligent design guy, boy, I could maybe make some money.
Yeah, pseudoscience seems very profitable, doesn't it?
Well, it's their demographic. Remember the framework. I've mentioned this example before, but it's the archetypal one. It's how quickly Breitbart moved to support the pizza bigots in Indiana. That they heard about that these two pizza players were running a pizza parlor, and they were terrified that they were going to have to cater gay weddings, like any gay couple was planning on having their pizza parlor cater their wedding. Like, duh. But anyway, they were feared of this. And Breitbart, on their own, set up a GoFundMe account for them. And in 2 days, raised $300,000 for lawsuits that didn't exist. 20,000 people in the Breitbart network contributed that in just those 2 bloody days. And that tells you why that network is so powerful and why Steve Bannon is advising the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and not David Niozzi or Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye.
Indeed. Although looking at some of the comments over on Breitbart, those are not the folks we want to support us in any way.
Oh gosh, no. But what it means is that the mindset, the very thing that lets the brakes off in the Culture Camp framework, we keep the brakes on. And so that leap of faith, that very skeptical, wary, because who knows diddly squat about me other than the fact that I'm a face on a screen. And so from that point of view, we would go very skeptical. This guy, yes, he sounds very good, but then so does the woo people that talk about healing crystals and all of that. Everybody sounds like their thing. So how do you make that decision? And so we have natural brakes on ourselves in terms of our skepticism, where we will support people that we know, that we've interacted with, that we formed a relationship with, but we're very reluctant to move beyond that. Whereas the whole essence of that leap of faith over in the mindset of religion is, oh, somebody I know supports this, ergo it's a good thing and I'll do too, and the lemming crowd moves. And so you marshal 20,000 people. To put that into perspective, Breitbart moved in 2 days a number of people equivalent to the entire membership of FFRF work on things. And my GoFundMe, 137 people, including you are one of the 137, in 3 years. Now, to give you a measurement, on average, I'm averaging out at $87, $88 per contributor. That is 3 times the generosity of the Breitbart gang, who were averaging out at about $27 for the pizza bigots. But they've got 20,000 and I have 137, and that's the difference. So there's no shortage of generosity and openness of spirit, but that connectivity thing, generous people, but they metastasize like ants, blah, 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 and move as a herd in a way that allows them to be influential way beyond their numbers. And it's a dangerous thing because they are influential way beyond their numbers. Look at the number of, if anybody reads, listens to my debate with Gary, they're going to have me talk about Jay Sekulow along the way. And who is Jay Sekulow? He is now a lawyer for the President of the United States. Now, do you think he's using exactly the same parse the data stream thing that he did when defending creationists or railing on about Planned Parenthood constantly as he is defending the President of the United States? No, he's using exactly the same method. And so the kinds of dangerous methodology that we're seeing in that culture camp framework, this is not some rarefied, weird abstraction. This affects real people, real world, right now as we speak. We have to play our game up a lot. Maybe sometime in the next evolution hour, we'll have to go into that notion about the network. Of gathering together a network of people. We are there. It costs no money to interact, to be able to monitor anti-evolutionism, to monitor the wooers at the local level and push back and interact. What really intrigues me is nobody at the National Center for Science Education is pushing back against Discovery Institute. All of them online. They don't Twitter back. They let the Discovery Institute do their little posts all the time, again and again and again. Same thing with Answers in Genesis. And I go after Answers in Genesis, and we go after Kent Hovind and these others, where we'll make comments, not on everything they do, but every so often there's something where you just got to stand up and say something. Why isn't NCSE doing that? Does it make a difference that you can't connect up? Because therefore, whenever you tweet with something, everybody who connects up to your network knows about that. So everybody theoretically following me theoretically can see my interactions with that. But we got to be able, if we can connect up better to where no anti-evolutionist or no woo person, climate change issues, boy, those are ones where if people had applied a source methods approach to a lot of these people way before they get to the problem of them being in a committee in Congress, maybe that could have slowed them down a little bit. It wouldn't stop them completely because you have a conservative demographic that's going to vote for them anyway. But nevertheless, you can't tell unless you try it. Ooh, I still don't understand how they got that TARDIS and forced it to work during the whole campaign. Oh, I'd love to have a TARDIS.
Finally, a few Doctor Who references. I've been waiting.
It's the most fascinating thing. It's, of course, the longest running science fiction ever, and it's mutated over the years, and I think it's doing some of its best work now. They're very cleverly and ingeniously done. They're serious. It's way beyond just a slight kid show, which is how it started out. I had to pointedly make my little time machine in Phileas Fogg not sound anything at all like a TARDIS. Much sounds at all. So I wanted to be as opposite as the TARDIS, because the one thing you can't say about the TARDIS is it's inconspicuous sonically. I mean, if you were sitting in your office and next door in the warehouse, a TARDIS arrived, you'd hear that bloody thing coming. It's as noisy as all get out. And so you would at the very least take attention to it. So I had to make a point of not doing that. Off on the way time travel and that has been handled in storylines. That's a whole digression there. What do you do when you think about Clown Car? Bad Wolf Motorcycle Club. Yeah, well, I loved it. I enjoyed the whole Torchwood series, which was the darkest of the bunch. Very tragic in many respects. Had a really interesting cast of people, very well crafted, and you learned about whales in a way that you wouldn't have thought about otherwise. And it helped extend things. I think the regular Doctor Who series was able to move farther on than they might have because of the experience they were having with Torchwood. And I liked that quite a lot. Phileas Gogg. No. Phileas Fogg, F-O-G-G. Or Phineas Brouillard, as he has as his nom de plume in the second book. Tom Baker was my doctor, but I do want Peter Capaldi was done with him. I've liked almost all of the ones. Baker, of course, was the one that, yes, RJ, oh, you little sneak, you know I've written a book. You read the damn thing, and you like both of them. Well, there you go, you shill, you damn shill, eat meal. He gave a very nice review of Phileas Fogg, and I was greatly appreciative of the fact, and it showed that I knew kind of what I was doing, that he could hear my voice when he was reading the book. That it was that tight to where, even though I'm writing in that Victorian style, that he could hear my voice when he was doing it. So if he had a nightmare, I could hear his voice while I was reading the book. But he apparently enjoyed the thing. Anyway, Tom Baker was the one that I first saw as Doctor Who. And it's been generally regarded that the Doctor you see initially is the one you tend to regard as the best one, because I only started watching the earlier shows after they started tinkering along. And some of them were the weakest of the bunch, although they all had fun with the roles. But Baker, who was literally rescued out of nowhere in a fabulous turn playing Rasputin in Nicholas and Alexandra. And after that, his career had basically tanked, and he was literally working as a construction worker when he got the news that they wanted him to play Doctor Who. And he had to kind of physically quit his job carrying bricks around to move on to do the Doctor Who thing. So this totally transformed his life, and he milked it for as much as he would. And yes, and so I've never been able to think of Jelly Babies in quite the same way since, because of dear Tom Baker. If you have a chance to see Nicholas and Alexandra, do that just for Tom Baker's Rasputin. It is a hoot. He's fabulous, and it's an excellent film. It was the film that Schaffner made after Patton, and it's not nearly as well known, but it's an excellent motion picture. Great history. When you yes, he did hold his fall breathing. It'd be fun to do an audio book of that someday. But anyway, I'm about midway through the second book, and it's I can't tell anything about it because it'd be spoiler alert. But I think it's if I can survive long enough to do it, it'll be the next one in the thing, and then I will gear shift at that stage, and then switch back to the next science book, which is on the Discovery Institute's Descent from Darwin list, which nobody has really done a full court press analysis on, to take on the notion, who are these people, and are they really that big as scientists, and how do we deal with all of that stuff? And there's been a little bit of it done at Rational Wiki, but not nearly as much as needs to be done. Another brick hole in the evolution defense wall that needs to be plugged. But the reptile-mammal transition was a bigger hole that needed to be done first, which is why I did that. Yeah, I don't think he could handle that level of excitement. That would be too frightening. But I've always enjoyed that Victorian, certain tongue-in-cheek quality. That's what you have to keep in mind when you read Darwin. That some of the things that creationists take out of context when they're talking about races and all the rest, a lot of that is that droll British wit where he's got a sly reference to backstory that they would get the joke of. It 150 years later isn't necessarily getting the context, and they're taking it literally. The same way that Mark Twain is such a vitriolically sharp writer. And if you don't notice that, then boy, you don't get Mark Twain. And he can do all these things. That's why people who regard Huckleberry Finn as controversial because of the use of the N word and all the rest, they're missing the point as to why he's doing that and in the way he does that and as the story progresses. So there's more to it than that. And again, I think I do better by dialogue than Jules Verne.
Oh, Eccleston. I liked Eccleston. Stupid apes.
Yeah, well, Eccleston was a superb actor, and he is.
Well, yeah, Eccleston
very sharp. And if you had his chance to see his wonderful version of Hamlet, very good. Very with what's his name, Dr. Picard, as Ian Stewart, as Claudius. All the Hartnell episodes and Troughton. Troughton popped up. Hartnell, of course, it was a wonderful BBC thing about the making of Doctor Who that related to him. He was a kind of an alcoholic and a sad guy who kind of had a resurrection of his career because of Doctor Who that transformed him and mellowed him a bit. And finally reached the stage where they had to write him out of the show because he couldn't remember his lines, and it was just so it had to basically farm him out. Troughton is a favorite character actor. He's the one, if you look in Jason and the Argonauts, he's the little philosopher who's being attacked by the Harpies. And that's the first time I ever noticed Patrick Troughton. So when I discovered that he played Doctor Who, I'm going, yeah, there's an impish quality to him. And he was in several of the Sinbad movies and others. I always loved Patrick Troughton as an actor. And I think he died not that long ago. He had a very, very long film career. Some of them have ups and downs. It's weird to see Peter Davidson today because he's like balding and it was like, oh, if ever you've seen Red Dwarf, the guy that plays the hologram, he popped up in an episode, I think, of the Midsummer Murders. And I was watching and I go, why does that guy look vaguely familiar? And then I suddenly went, holy moly, that's the hologram guy from Smegland. And he'd gotten older and but he finally just a little twist in the way that his mouth went and the way his voice went. I go, holy moly, that's him. Why, your career didn't end after Red Dwarf. Yes, just this once. Everybody lives. Well, that's the wonderful thing about age, the fact that we have that world of home video. When I first brought home video CED video discs for the first time, where for the very first time I could watch a movie at home the way I would play a record. And you can't imagine the miracle that was, because before you either saw the movie in the theater, showed up on television, cut, edited, trimmed, or not at all, because the movie was never re-released again. And so Citizen Kane I'd heard about for years and had never had a chance to see the damn thing. I saw a performance at a junior college in the late 60s. Literally silent. It's just the film. No music, nothing. And that's not what you were supposed to do. So I imagine listening through a 2-hour edition of Metropolis where just going all the time. Now I can watch with the original music that was recorded, written for it by Huppert's back in the 1920s with full symphony orchestra, full-length movie in a way that I could never have done back when I was growing up. So this is an astonishing world we live in. I need to spend a night next to RJ at the bar. I'd be drinking a daiquiri. Yeah.
Hey, RJ, you know what I just noticed we really suck at?
Ending?
Yes, indeed. We suck at that. We've done this before. Do you remember the 3-hour evolution hour?
One thing leads to another. And everything is just wonderfully fast. Science fiction is an area that I'm just phenomenally interested in. Film music is an area I'm interested in. The philosophy of stuff. I've grown up on a lot of these things, and the transformation of time. Even in the case of my CDs back in there, I am like an emperor. Music ever written. If somebody who was a working class schlub, I was literally the first person in my family to ever go to college, and I had to work my way through Eastern there. I was a teaching assistant in that to get some money to pull that off. This was in the early 70s. that there would have been no way in hell I could ever have heard a Mahler symphony. They wouldn't have been performed often on radio, and you wouldn't have had a chance to go to a symphony. Spokane eventually had a symphony orchestra and still does, but you would have been completely irrelevant. Whereas I can pop on Mahler's 10th Symphony anytime I want. So in the course of collecting all of this thing over the years, I have access to the things that kings would have been able to do. So all you young whippersnappers out there who don't realize how effing lucky you are not only to have music streaming and video streaming, but all the great works of the world, the science papers, the writings of things available at the touch of a click of a mouse. How dare you be stupid? How dare you be Alex Jones? How dare you be Donald Trump when you have a cornucopia of knowledge out there for you to have within a moment's notice? You have no excuse for stupid. None.
Well said.
There's a rant.
I would tend to agree. That was extremely well said. All right, let's wrap it up. Let's wrap it up there, Chief.
Okay. I would crush RJ in a karaoke contest. I guarantee you would, Buckaroo. I would be toast.
All right. Well, that's RJ. Thanks for sharing your vast knowledge with all of us and everybody that joined us. Thank you for coming.
Karaoke Japanese for tone deaf. I love that.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. I hope I haven't burdened or bored you any, and I hope some things lead off to doing interesting things. See you next week if I haven't been struck by lightning or if the electric bill gets cut off.
All right. Oh, RJ, you want to put out any thank yous to the folks that I know you have some supporters these days? You want to?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, we got Eat Meal. Thank you. You are a patron. Paul Williams and Jen B. and Totes Real. I've got the 4 patrons there, and I will never forget you. Heavens. And hopefully there will be more people who will be, the fact that they are not in that elite circle who have become patrons of the RGA Evolution Hour. And believe me, anybody who has suggestions or comments that they would like to have for future discussions on there, go to the TIP website, plug your information down there and tell me about it, or tweet me. Any of these, or my damned email for those of you that have my email. I think I've given that to all of the patrons on there. And there's lots of different ways that you can bring up subject matter on that. Heck-a-mighty. That's what it's for. Get some feedback on things, because the subjects come up because of what Cy brings up, or stuff that I've encountered, or things that'll pop up there. But who knows what's the cutting edge thing where, oh, if just somebody would talk about that and kind of see. And if I don't know about it, it may be a spur to my doing research on it that I might not know about, or I can pull a little rabbit out of my hat and drop material on there that will clarify and illuminate that. So, good night by now. Forget who. Oh, I know. Oh, Paul Williams. Didn't he play Little Enos? Yeah, dear Paul Williams. Yes, he was in some of the Muppet films. He wrote a lot of their Muppet music, and also played in the Cheap Detective, which is one of my favorite droll satirical comedies, the sequel to Murder by Death. See, I'm off on it again. I can't stop.
Hey, you know what we forgot to mention? And when I think of all the RJ's Evolution Hours we've done, we mentioned the Patreon and all that. We forgot to mention everybody's welcome there. It's not an exclusive club. Anybody can join. We may have given the impression that it's only for the select few. No. Everyone can support RJ over there.
We want all the world to go in there. Not that I'm expecting Ken Ham or Kent Hovind or Steve Meyer or Ray Comfort, other people to ever be wanting, or Dinesh D'Souza or Ann Coulter from their perspectives, since they shut their mouth off on evolution and climate change and that too. Anybody checks my latest videos, I've got an assortment of things, and I got a whole section then on Ann Coulter that I lambasted her. There's links to that in the stuff I did at Talk Reason. Then I also discuss it in Slam Dunk, which Eat Meal will know about because it's in the book there, and you know about too, Cy, because you have it.
Indeed.
Broaden my interests and be an equal opportunity annoyer.
All right. On that note, let us draw to a dignified close here.
I'll just say, yes, you want murder by death, best murder mystery parody ever. Do check The Cheap Detective, because I contend that it's even better than Murder by Death. Murder by Death has got a lot of delightful stuff in it, but in the sequel is just absolutely exquisite, and it's got some of my all-time favorite moments in there. It's parodying almost every Humphrey Bogart movie ever, and it's in my view even better, although it's not as widely known as Murder by Death. Yes, Tutu Twain. Oh yes, yeah. That's if you haven't seen Murder of the Cheap Detective, give it a try. It's marvelous.
All righty. Good night, everyone. Thanks for coming. And let's see. Let's play RJ's thing one more time. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming. Oh, look, there's a Patreon link down there, RJ. Did you notice?
Yeah, isn't that neat?
Look at that, son of a gun. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Nice.